Hello again. Do you remember the case about the Chagos Islands where it created an awful lot of controversy, and there was this concept of international law which Starmer and his chum Hermer uh, gave unswerving devotion to in how they administered it. Now I want to look at this concept of international law in regards to something that's happened quite recently, and that is the UK's decision to effectively, want of a better word, I can't think of one, to steal what they call the economic gains of immobilized Russian assets. So these are assets that the Russian Federation deposited in London, likely into things like sovereign bonds, and they were frozen when Russia invaded Ukraine, and the interest which has accumulated up on those bonds and other investments, now it looks like the UK is making a move to, well, they've started a move to seize those economic gains and use them in the purpose of providing £1 billion to Ukraine to purchase military equipment to help them in their campaign or defence against Russia. Now, seizing assets on the invasion of Ukraine is quite bold, but you can sort of understand that. But to take that a step further and actually steal part of those assets and then hand them to Ukraine to then use against Russia it really is an unprecedented step. It's kind of, it is an act of theft effectively, and the question is, if the UK were so sure of its position, then why not rely on international law? Now, it's an obvious question, and the answer is equally obvious, because it wouldn't have been sanctioned. Now, whatever you think of Russia, and people are entitled to their opinions, and I'm trying to be neutral and give you the situation as I see it, there is no justification or any international precedent that I can find where assets can be stolen without going through due legal process. And there's the other side of this, actually, is if they've used £1 billion effectively up to date. So in terms of the war in Ukraine, which I don't condone the invasion at all, I've said that many times, £1 billion will make no difference one way or the other. But you think of the reputational damage this has done, because if you're a Saudi investor, Bahraini, from Abu Dhabi, Qatar, and so on and so forth, then you're going to look at London now, the UK, and you're going to think, well, I can invest quite a lot of money there, but what happens if we have a situation arise where the UK consider it appropriate to seize my assets and to then go beyond that and steal them? So how does that sit with the secondary objective, which I've discussed many times in the context of how the wealth tech situation has been handled, and promoting London as a serious financial centre? It's just mindless in terms of why you would do such a thing, whilst also trying to promote your financial centre as reliable, with integrity, and being an international leader. So it's quite extraordinary, and in many ways it's these own goals that we're seeing recently are hard to fathom. I mean, another one would be Donald Trump in his aggressive action towards India and levying aggressive sanctions on them because they purchased Russian oil and so on. Now, already Trump has done there, and the UK actually as well, but on a smaller scale with what I've just described, is in terms of what we consider to be not the West, all it's done is brought them closer together, and you saw that with China this week. So effectively what we're doing is pushing the rest of the world to come up with different solutions because they can't trust the Western financial system because they see how it'll be arbitrarily weaponized against them. And in terms of Ukraine, again, I've said I don't condone the invasion. In my opinion, the war in Ukraine started at the point of independence. It's taken various forms since, made it quite clear. But in terms of the Russian position, there's a few there's a few distortions I'm going to try and address here that you've seen the UK government use and the non-independent media that we have in the UK. One is actually in the article published, I think, on the 3rd of September, announcing this theft of Russian assets to provide $1 billion to the Ukraine to buy this military equipment. John Healey said that the UK's security starts in Ukraine. That's false. And what he's trying to get you to believe here is that Russia is going to plough on through and effectively invade all of Europe, get to the north coast of France, hop, skip and a jump over the channel, and absorb the United Kingdom and the island of Ireland as well. That's just ridiculous, because they never stated that, ever. They never had any plans that I know of to ever invade the United Kingdom. And if you look at what's happened in Ukraine so far, they have struggled. They're in the ascendancy now, but they've struggled at times. They've lost a lot of personnel, and the idea that they can then roll on into Poland, where I'm sat now, who have one of the largest armies in Europe, and then plough through them and then go through Germany and so on and so forth, is absolutely ridiculous. It's mindless that we're expected to believe that. The other line that's peddled, and Sky News are particularly good at doing this, is they use this term that the invasion was unprovoked, and it was an unprovoked invasion. But that's not true either, because there was quite a lot of provocation. The provocation was in the form of NATO expansion, and also the Russians had expressed their concern and their displeasure at NATO expansion and encirclement, and how it made them feel insecure. That was consistently ignored. And the other aspect was the mistreatment of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. So there was definitely provocation, although I will say provocation is not justification for offensive action, and I always think that war should be avoided at all costs. And but you can see the narrative is peddled in a false way to justify effectively what Starmer and Macron are calling the coalition of the willing, which is really a coalition of the Wallies in many respects, headed by two countries who are heading quite steadily towards quite serious credit events. They want to put international troops into Ukraine after there's been some sort of settlement on the war. Now, you imagine how that would go down in Russia, where Putin's effectively justified this war on the basis of pushing back against NATO expansion and undermining the security of Russia. That's his opinion. So he would have to conclude a war and then go back and say, well, we've taken some land, arguably liberated some Russians ethnic Russians that are being mistreated by Ukrainians, but we've brought foreign troops closer to our shores, closer to our borders. Sorry, that would be a disaster, and there's no credible way which you can see that being a conclusion. Yet Starmer and Macron and to a certain extent Merz are pushing very, very aggressively to this, as they trying to pull the US into this situation, whereas Trump, when he's away from the voices of Europe and his supporters are sanguine enough to see that there has to be land ceded and security guarantees that suit both sides, but that doesn't necessitate troops, because the presence of troops would raise tensions, and you would end up with a conclusion which is a bit like that at the end of World War One. You'd be sort of laying the foundation for the next war, which arguably some people want. And we're being fed lies, and we're being pulled closer to a conflict that doesn't need to take place. And I don't justify the invasion. I understand some of the provocations of the Russian point of view, but there is a determination by some in Europe to pull the United States in and escalate this conflict, and it's greatly concerning. And this latest theft of assets is one angle to that. And you've got two countries leading it, France and the UK, that are in quite serious financial trouble, and you can't help thinking that they are looking for external antagonisms to take away attention from their own very, very serious issues. Now, I mean, I'm here in central Poland, and life seems brighter away from the tyranny. I'm quickly reminded that it's not normal for people to go to prison for posting things on social media. It's not normal for people to be manhandled, arrested and charged for standing up against the worst acts of genocide this side of the Second World War, acts of genocide that the Starmer government are complicit in. And I have people, I've been ill, unfortunately, the last few days, and I'd have done this video earlier, but even at that time I had a number of people come to me and say, oh, is this real, what's happening in the UK? What has happened to this country? And it is becoming a laughingstock in so many respects, and it's no exaggeration. And I'm going to conclude now with I'm going to read you bear with me, a quote from Winston Churchill, and it's volume 1 of his Histories of the English-speaking Peoples. And in it, here, Churchill is discussing the decline of the Roman Empire in the context of Britannia. It's a short quote, but think about these words and think about what they remind you of. The cities are everywhere in decline. Trade, industry and agriculture bend under the weight of taxation. Communications are less safe, and some provinces are infested with marauders, peasants who can no longer earn a living on the land. So in essence, he was saying that towards the end of its time, it became more oppressive, it became more burdensome with taxation. And as I've said, I've used this analogy of revolutionary France, not in a violent way, but in a relatively way where you have the first state and the first estate, and then the second estate and the third estate. So let's have your first estate as the political sector, the second estate as the public sector, and then all the quongos and agencies and authorities that hang on to that and the people that feed into it. And then the third estate is your private sector, and that ranges from your company owner down to your employee. And it's the same, what he's referring to there is the same as what we've got now, is you've got this enormously parasitic first and second estate that's sapping the life and bleeding dry the third estate. And the other aspect that Churchill identifies is communications are less safe. Does that remind you of anything? And the cities being less safe, and okay, he used the term marauders and peasants, but yeah, I think we can understand that our cities are a lot less safe, and I can tell you I feel a lot safer here than I do in the UK, and it feels like being out of a prison. It feels life is freer here. People are allowed to criticise on TV, people are allowed within the bounds of reason to express discontent, and it's frightening how much the UK has descended into an authoritarian, declining state in many ways. It's quite extraordinary. But anyway, that's enough for now, and if I get time, there's a few places where I like to visit around here that give me pause for reflection, and they'll possibly give me the opportunity to put into context some inconsistencies and geopolitical misunderstandings. So take care for now. Bye.